Our next presentation is from Daphne Green, Gladys Cook, and Lori Forsman talking about a housing resilience policy audit.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to just really briefly introduce our speakers and give an overview of the project. So yes, earlier this year, the RPC initiated the Housing Assets and Resilient Policy, or HARP project, using funds awarded through the DEP's new Resilient Florida program, and we did so in hopes to further implement the goals of the R2C and its Strategic Resilience Action Plan. So this project actually has two components to it. So the housing assets portion is being implemented through a partnership with the with the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies, and then the second component that we're going to hear about today is being implemented through a partnership with the Florida Housing Coalition. And through the partnership with the Florida Housing Coalition and through a partnership with a local county partner, which we've been fortunate to work with Orange County to do this project, we were able to conduct the resilient policy audit, and really assess the county's many policy frameworks and assess its capacity for housing risk mitigation. And so this process was great because it allowed for us to identify opportunities that the local government could take to develop and implement policies that better support resilient housing initiatives and also better prioritize housing as a component of risk mitigation. So this task has been successfully completed. We are really happy with the work that's been done and the partnerships that we've been able to form as well. And we hope that we can build off of this effort to, in the future, conduct similar resilience-focused assessments in the region. So today I'm happy to introduce the Florida Housing Coalition team that we've been working with. And they will be able to detail for us the process, the lessons learned, and the policy findings that we've gathered from the policy audit. So today we're going to have Gladys Cook, who is the Resilience and Recovery Director for the Florida Housing Coalition, speak. And alongside her, they're also going to have Alyssa Plancher and Dana Lazarus, who are both technical advisors with the Florida Housing Coalition. Following that, we're going to have Lori Forsman with Orange County speak. She is the Sustainability Program Manager for Orange County, and she has been a great support for the project. And we are fortunate to have them both here today to talk about, and especially Lori, because she's going to break down the experience that the county staff had from this process and their takeaways from it.
I just want to thank you, Daphne, and thank you, Jennifer, and members of the council and guests for having us today. Last week, we presented a half-day workshop on housing vulnerability assessments and funding sources at the Governor's Hurricane Conference. We had a standing room only audience of emergency management officials from counties all over Florida, staff from FEMA and the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Emergency management officials want to reduce the prolonged duration of emergency or temporary housing, which can often lead to permanent displacement, not alone the extraordinary costs of housing repair and replacement. And one of their primary objectives is for people to be able to adequately insure their homes and to be able to shelter in place in the event of a disaster. And that's what HARP is really all about. HARP is a housing vulnerability assessment tool that's focused on the planning framework. It's a policy audit that measures if local plans, policies, and programs support housing resilience and best practice mitigation strategies. We're really grateful that Orange County volunteered to undergo the policy audit process, which included their comprehensive plan, local mitigation strategy, local housing assistance plan, floodplain management plan, and construction standards, and a few others. So we prepared a detailed report on the development of the tool and Orange County's outcomes. The report includes recommendations for policies that will strengthen planning for housing resilience. We also prepared a guide to funding and planning resources that includes how to use the several new funding tools to accomplish housing resilience in the region, including FEMA's BRIC program, Resilient Florida, and state and local fiscal recovery funds. So Dana Lazarus from our team will give you a brief overview of the methodology of the HARP tool, and then Alyssa Plancher will share with you some of the more significant of our findings and recommendations. If there's any questions or comments, we ask that they be put in the chat since our audio isn't very clear. So thank you. I'll hand it over to Dana.
Thanks, Gladys. Yep, next slide, please. Yeah, we created this housing resilience policy audit checklist, and I'm going to try to paint a picture of the tool and the process for you. The policy audit checklist is an Excel spreadsheet with 16 tabs. Tabs 7 through 15 are each dedicated to a key plan, like as Gladys mentioned, the comprehensive plan and local housing assistance plan, or a key planning process like public engagement and hazard risk assessment. Then a planner who's an expert in that plan or process is assigned to each tab. Within each tab is a series of housing resilience policy or process statements relevant to that plan or process. And the planner answers yes, no, or in process next to each policy statement, resulting in a tabulated score for each plan. The steps that you see on this screen are designed to get a local jurisdiction through the policy audit from start to finish. If you want to learn more about this methodology, there is an in-depth explanation in our final report, but I'm just giving a brief overview. Next slide, please. Once the checklist is complete, we take a look at each plan's score and we sort the plans into one of these performance categories, from exemplary to emerging leader to strong, then average and at risk. The idea with these categories is to quantitatively understand how much opportunity for improvement there is within each plan in a way that isn't punitive like a grade, because the whole purpose of this checklist and the process is to improve interdepartmental collaboration around housing resilience and identify sort of low-hanging fruit where policy and process adaptations can be made to improve the resilience of vulnerable housing, as well as big picture strategies. Next slide. So again, Orange County is wonderful. They volunteered to be a model jurisdiction for the region for this checklist process. So here's the result of Orange County's policy audit. Seeing it this way allows a local government to sort of prioritize opportunities where they can improve how they address housing resilience in existing plans and processes. As you can see, not a single plan was ranked at risk, and over half were ranked at strong resilience leaders or better. So great job, Orange County. Next slide, please. Just more specifically, these are the Orange County plans that stood out as exemplary and strong performers. These plans incorporate many best practices and policies for housing resilience and hazard mitigation. Next slide. And these are the plans we identified as having a solid foundation upon which there is a lot of opportunity to really address housing resilience and hazard risk mitigation. Next slide. In our report, we break down our observations and specific recommendations for each plan and process for Orange County. And on the screen, you'll see just a few examples. Several of these observations are related to where there's opportunity for interdepartmental coordination and the benefit of doing interdepartmental coordination. For example, planners in other departments would benefit from having access to the detailed floodplain mapping tools that the Floodplain Management Office has developed. Again, all of these are organized, and all of these like findings and recommendations are organized in our final report. Thank you again to Orange County for participating. Now I'm going to kick it off to Alyssa, who is going to explain what our findings mean for the region as a whole. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Dana. All right. And so over the next few slides, you'll see just listed recommended priority actions based on our evaluation of the planning framework. And we're just going to highlight a few of these. The first recommendation is to define housing as a critical asset and ensure that housing is incorporated consistently throughout hazard mitigation and response plans. And where this can be actionable is within your local mitigation strategy. Through the LMS action plan, this is where local governments can prioritize projects for mitigation efforts. And by including residential projects, you're providing parity to other non-residential structures for housing hazard mitigation. The next example is to ensure policies for disaster mitigation and response are included in plans that are focusing on housing and especially affordable housing. And where this can be an actionable recommendation is within your local housing assistance plan. This is your spending and implementation plan for your SHIP funds. And through the housing activities such as, rehab or other interim repairs due to disaster, local governments can require that any SHIP funded activities include housing mitigation techniques. And so those are some really important recommendations that can be quickly adopted within your planning framework. Another high-level recommendation that really is regional is to ensure that there is a housing expert or a housing champion across all of the planning teams. So somebody with the housing expertise can sit down and provide high-level information and details as it relates to each individual plan. Next slide, please. The next priority actions we're going to highlight are the local government's ability to establish any robust public outreach and engagement programs. This can ensure that residents who are receiving public funding toward like down payment assistance or repairs have education for reducing heirs property incidents, preparing homebuyers for estate planning, and making sure that there is a prioritized equitable distribution of resources, along with the education for housing hazard mitigation and resilience. Another actionable item recommendation is to compare consolidated plan targeted areas, which are your most underserved areas, with any of your implementation and funding plans. So you're targeting them for investment with your home and CDBG dollars. Next slide, please. All right. And we also recommend engaging the State Floodplain Management Office to evaluate whether flood hazard areas in your communities warrant higher construction standards. And so through this process, they can work with local governments to submit something called a technical amendment to the Florida Building Commission as it is warranted. And also, we do recommend developing and adopting a standalone housing resilience strategic plan that will coordinate with and ensure consistent language across your entire planning framework. Next slide, please. All right. And one of the most important elements here is ensuring that you have the appropriate data to develop the policies and recommendations and target these indicators. So our indicators are really the location of where this housing is located, whether it's like a flood hazard area, the type of housing, so whether it's like mobile homes or substandard housing, and also the indicator of population. So persons with disabilities, elderly households, and lower income households. So when developing your plans, targeting these indicators and ensuring that you're targeting housing hazard mitigation funding to these will help create a resilient community. Next slide, please. And so our recommendations to incorporating housing hazard mitigation plans starts with developing a list of plan updates, developing a housing resilience strategic plan, reviewing your process to amend plans and incorporate consistent policies, goals, and objectives that are specific to housing hazard mitigation, and establishing an interagency roundtable that includes plan experts that are identified in the checklist. And essentially, the foundation of the standalone housing resilience strategic plan allows for local governments to have that consistent policy language, strategies, and implementation efforts to really drive housing hazard mitigation and resilience across your entire planning framework. Next slide, please. And lastly, I did speak briefly about some of the plans and how you can directly link housing hazard mitigation with these planning frameworks. This is just our guide to housing resilience planning and resources and funding opportunities. Next slide. So thank you so much for your time, and we really are happy to be here today.
Thank you, Alyssa. Now we'll have Lori Forsman speak.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to give a little feedback on our process and just quickly introduce Jeff Benavides, our Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer, and then myself as the project team lead for this effort. And then from a project standpoint, I just want to go through a little bit of our process, how we viewed what we were doing to help with this checklist. From a project management perspective, our timeline was very tight, but we did We were very grateful that they were willing to understand the processes were in place right now. We're working on our Vision 2050 comp plan, so getting this done as quickly as possible so we could influence some of the plans that we have being updated right now was very important. But that was, as you can imagine, some of you coming from county government, a little difficult at time to make sure that we did that top-down approach to engage all of the proper staff. When we were doing the checklist, we did have a few challenges. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but with the sharing of a Google Doc, not all of our staff uses Google and can do that kind of sharing. So we had a little bit of downloading spreadsheets and uploading and things like that. But so what we did was we recommended a one-on-one virtual session with Alyssa, and so staff really appreciated that because as they were going through their checklist, they were able to communicate directly with her and answer questions, and those comments were inserted in the checklist. So it was really helpful for them to get that feedback from her and what does this question mean so that they could answer it better. And we did get a little bit of feedback from some people that they appreciated that this assessment overall, and they were hoping that we could do something like this on a more regular basis, like annually, so that we can continually check and recheck that we're incorporating the recommendations. We can go to the next tab. The next slide. Workshops. So everyone loved the workshops. They thought that they were really informative, and even though some of the feedback might have been you need to do this or you're not doing this, they really felt like they were learning across the organization, and they were seeing how in some cases we were very operating in our pillars and not cross-pollinating our expertise. And so they really understood that even small changes like having a housing champion on the local mitigation strategy plan update will really help influence some of what goes into that plan for the next update. So they were very appreciative of sort of seeing where they were lacking and where some of those gaps were. The challenges were that, we had several workshops. They were long. They had a lot of content, so it's always hard to engage staff who definitely have other jobs to do, in that process. Go ahead. So from our implementation perspective, as I did say, that we're in the middle of, or in the very beginning stages of our Vision 2050 comp plan. We've actually have a draft of our housing section, and we're actually doing some engagement on June the 8th. So getting this feedback and getting this information and specifically language that we can put in that housing section of that draft comp plan will be very beneficial to us because we need to get that moving through our engagement process, and we don't want to miss this opportunity to incorporate those great recommendations. We also have a consolidated plan update. Our housing consolidated plan update is happening right now with a contractor, and their deadline is the middle of June. So getting this feedback and getting some language that will go directly into that housing consolidated plan is obviously what this effort was all about. So in the deliverables, we really need to get some suggested language that we can use for insertion. And for this last workshop, we're going to try to focus on our comp plan team and our housing consolidated plan update, including that contractor that's doing the work for them, and really focus on what the recommendations are so we can get as much as possible into these plans in their moment of update at this time. And I think you saw a lot of the recommendations that Elisa was giving were things like developing new plans or creating a work group, doing a vulnerability analysis. Some of the recommendations were boots on the ground analysis of resilience of our housing across the county, and that kind of stuff is going to need funding. So we're going to really look to work with the team on how and appreciate that guide they're giving us on what the funding sources are so we can try to get some of that funding to do some of the recommendations of the plan. So the last slide, I'm just really saying thank you for bringing us into the fold. It was perfect timing for us with the 2 updates that we're undergoing. Our staff, appreciated working interactively with them. And, we thank you all for investing in Orange County's future. Thank you.
Thank you.